Reddit, what's your best / funniest personal example of petty revenge? I had a guy in school who would always skip class and then ask for my notes. We had a group project worth almost 40% of our grade and he did zero work, and the prof told me tough luck. Instead of just saying no the next time he asked for notes, I took the low road and began giving him edited versions. I would leave items out of lists, incorrectly define things, or just straight up write stuff that makes no sense. An example of the crap I would put in: to calculate return on investment, subtract your yearly earnings from your current bank balance, then multiply by h's factorial, 4.22. If he had even once bothered to crack the text he would have figured it out, but that apparently would have been too much effort for him. He retook that class. This reminds me of two people I knew at university. Both were taking maths. One was a Belgian student, the other one was English, and got in on a scholarship, so he got a lot of money to study there, on the condition he didn't have to retake any semesters. In the first year they were flatmates and the Belgian girl would often complain about having to more or less drag the lad to lectures. The second year they were housemates with the lad's alcoholic friends and the lad spent all of his time drinking and going out. Instead of attending lectures he would just pester the girl to go over what he had missed with him. Needless to say, they had a falling out. She stopped even trying to drag him to lectures and refused to help him. Near the end of the year, with the exams approaching, he was called in by the staff over his complete lack of attendance and reminded of the circumstances of his scholarship. He panicked and begged the girl for help. She refused and he went berserk, forcing her to lock herself in her room. I later got a phone call from her in a complete state saying her notes had vanished 2 days before the exams. Clearly it was the lad who had done it. Through a series of acquaintances we were able to get him to leave the house, and I stood watch whilst she went into his room, and lo and behold there were the notes. From the few fresh scribbles on the first few sheets it was obvious that the lad had not realized that the girl had written all her notes in French before taking them and had tried to use Google Translate to decipher them. Too bad she also had terrible handwriting. I love this. Okay, this is not easy to understand, so let me explain first something about Chinese, Shanghai, culture. Old Chineses think that it's really shameful to have a son near 30 who is still not married, cause it means that you are not a good parent for not having find a good bride for your son, or you are too poor to afford a marriage, or your son is ugly. People won't care if someone don't want to have a family or what. Anyway, they are going to speak ill about you and your family. The pressure is pretty high and everyone tend to want a grandchild, better if male, as soon as possible. My mother got sick 5 years ago in China. We are immigrants so she don't have insurance there. Her treatment went more than 30,000 and we went broken. Since her aunts and uncles still owned her some money she asked back some, but guess what? They denied it and let her sick and wait for death, cause they don't need the friendship of someone broken. I have to quit school and work to help her, and that's the reason for my poor English. After 4 years she was cured, and I got myself a family, had 2 sons, and bought a house with the help of my in-laws' business. Everything turned out just fine. Last year I took my sons to China and went to visit all of them as the tradition says, and they gave me the red pocket money for my sons with a sour face, and I asked my mom why. She told me that her aunt and uncle's sons still are single, all of them, and I have not 1 but 2 children. I spent the whole night pointed out how wonderful to have children. Sorry, not a funny story. Good on you, and glad you mum is okay. This could explain why some of my co-workers are always angry. My mom had a fantastic one. She was a language teacher at my high school, and years after I had graduated, she called me kind of upset because a group of guys was trying to make her look dumb. The class was supposed to write one of those team dialogues in Spanish and had a week or so to prepare it, then had to perform it in front of the class. When she called for them to do this, they said, "But we already did ours. We are not doing it again." She said, "You definitely didn't do it. I don't have any record of it here, and I would remember it if you had." They refused to do it, insisting they already performed it and that it was her fault she didn't take notes/scores down. She was feeling puzzled and questioning herself when one of the good kids came and said they didn't do it. They were bragging about making you look stupid and threatened the whole class if they told you anything. But please don't tell them I told you this. I don't want any problems with them. These were those stereotypical dumb jock types who everyone was scared of for whatever reason. My mom was really into yoga at the time and got a great idea while meditating. She went in the next day and said, "Boys, I owe you an apology. I found my notes on your presentation, and I do remember it. I don't know how I forgot." She went on to describe all the grammatical mistakes they made, that their dialogue hadn't been as long as required, that they didn't include the necessary vocabulary, etc. All made up. She failed them all on the project and they couldn't do a thing about it without admitting they'd made it all up. TL. Doctor, my mom is awesome. I was waiting for she told them it had been so good that they'd been selected to present it during a school assembly the next day, but this was better. Then she could add, "I remember now. I was touched by your courage to stand in front of the whole class and admitted you still pee the bed. Then you just cried for 15 minutes. I didn't have the note card because I gave it to the yearbook committee and forgot. My bad. Can you replicate that great speech tomorrow?" Back when I was a senior in high school around Christmas time, my parents allowed me to skip school to go buy Christmas gifts and say frick it for the day. I had my license, so I was excited to just do my own thing that day. I head out to the mall in the other town and am having one of those really good days. You know, where for no particular reason you are just happy and floating through the day. It was sunny out and not too cold. Just a perfect day. After I finish up at the mall, I figure I would treat myself. I got one of those big gulp Slurpees from 7-Eleven. The almost gallon looking cup that barely fits into any of your cup holders with the red shovel and straw of Mountain Dew Code Red. Hell yes, this was continuing to be an awesome day. I needed to cross a bridge to get over the big river in our area and onto the highway I needed. The bridge had the outside lane closed midway through. I'm in the inside lane and need to get to the right turn lane at the end of the bridge. Before the closure, this lady in a nice BMW tries to speed up and cut in front of me before the lane closed. I was like, WTF. This was dangerous as it is being all tight and everyone following close, so I don't let her in, and she slides in behind of me, cutting off the person behind me. Whatever. I can see in my mirror she is waving her arms around and upset. As I pull into the right turn lane, she pulls up next to me and rolls down her window. All I see is animated movements and someone yelling. So I roll down my window. This old bitch isn't going to ruin my day. My initial plan is to just be overly nice to her. Bishy people in a fit hate when you are super nice to them. But after I roll down my window, I hear her breaking into a tirade against teenage drivers. "You kids should learn manners. You kids shouldn't be driving. I'll have you arrested." And just being a mean woman because I wouldn't let her break the rules and cut everyone in line. So I had a moment of brilliance. I reach over, grab my fully filled and bright red Slurpee, and with my right arm I sorta chucked it across my body. My initial plan was that it would hit her door or something and spill everywhere on her paint, causing her to have to go to a car wash. What actually happened turned out better than I could have imagined. Now, remember, she was leaning over into the passenger seat to yell at me. So as I chucked this tank of red sticky slushy out my window, it didn't hit her car door or any part of the outside. Instead, it sailed perfectly into her open window and exploded when it hit the headrest of her passenger seat. I'm talking bright red slushy exploding all over the nice tan leather interior, windshield, and best of all on the woman's face. The look of utter shock and awe on her face was absolutely incredible. She went from one moment being rude, mean, and authoritative to suddenly shocked and trying to process a situation. I simply said Merry Christmas and drove away. Those were the only words I spoke to her. Afterwards I felt kinda bad. I mean, I didn't mean to throw it in her car, but rather on it. That mess must have been a pain in the peen to get cleaned up. But after thinking about it a little more, I was very happy that it turned out the way it did. You'll love this. If you remember back, I'm pretty sure it was Burger King that ran a "Behold the Power of Cheese" TV commercial. Remember that? So my dad went and grabbed breakfast from McDonald's, and the sandwich he got had cheese sticking out on all sides. Because square cheese, round sandwich. He also does not like the egg, but small animals do. So at a red light, He chucked a bit of the egg out the window and started trimming cheese off too. This lady pulled up next to him and rolled down her window. "What the hell do you think you're doing? That's littering. etc. I mean, I guess it is, but it's not like it's plastic." Whatever. Light turns green. Pull up 40 yards to the next red light. He grabs the last of the cheese and tosses it out the window right as this lady pulled up to keep shouting at him. The cheese lands right on her windshield. She starts ranting about it and turns on her windshield wipers to wipe off the hot melty cheese. It smeared all over the windshield. Just as the light turns green and there was enough room to get into the right hand turn lane so my dad could finally turn. He looks over at her from his car, smiles, and in a loud voice says, "Behold, the power of cheese," and turned right as she went straight. No clue what happened after that. For a while, I worked as a web designer in a small ad agency serving a very niche industry. Previously, the design team had no creative lead and were all sort of operating independently across varying clients. We decided to hire a creative director to fill that gap, and I was given the task of sorting through and giving first round interviews to find the person who would later become my supervisor. Two candidates in particular stood out from the rest for very different reasons. One was exceptionally talented, an all-around nice guy, and somebody who generally would have been great for the role. The other, let's call him John, had mediocre talent, came across as an insufferable arrogant prick, but had previous experience working within the niche industry that we serviced. He also had contacts within that industry that could lead to new business. Despite my strong recommendation to not hire John, his relationships in the industry were too compelling to our agency's leadership to pass up, and they hired him. It didn't take long before the entire company started to realize John was a huge burden. He had virtually zero experience in anything related to digital design. Design for apps, websites, mobile, etc. were all completely and utterly beyond his grasp, but he used his position of relative power to make decisions on those projects that the entire design team refused to support, most of which came back to bite the company in the ass later. The design team hated him because fixing and working around his screw-ups became part of our daily routine. The sales team hated him because he'd claim it took him unbelievably exaggerated amounts of time to complete even the most trivial of tasks. 4 days to design a business card template, so they wouldn't even assign him projects anymore. Work that was clearly his responsibility started to rapidly trickle down to the rest of the design team. We'd be working late nights 4 out of 5 days a week because all of his projects that were in danger of missing deadlines would be reassigned to us. Meanwhile, he'd be the first to walk out the door every day, right at 5 PM, without fail. On top of all that, the guy was absolutely, without a doubt, the biggest tool I've ever met. Always right about everything, completely unbending on his idiotic opinions, and completely clueless that literally every person in the building wished he would get hit by a truck. I genuinely tried to work with him for about a year until I decided that the job had become intolerable because of him and wasn't going to change anytime soon, so I turned in my 2-week notice. About a month after I left, I heard that he had been let go from the job. Shortly after that, I noticed that he had changed his LinkedIn status to show that he was working for a new agency I had never heard of, also servicing that same niche industry. I looked them up and quickly figured out that he had started his own agency, a primarily digital agency, when he had no experience in digital or interactive design and had literally messed up every digital/interactive project he'd ever been on. I know, because most of them were reassigned to me when he proved incapable of doing them himself. I looked at the portfolio on his website and found literally project after project of my work. He was using my work from the ad agency as examples of the work his agency could produce. I briefly considered contacting him and requesting he remove my work from his portfolio for ethical reasons, but I could already hear his reply in my head. As creative lead, all work done by my team is an extension of my creative direction. He'd used similar lines in the past to insert himself into receiving credit on successful projects he'd had zero involvement on. So instead I sent an email to one of the partners of the agency we both had worked for, saying something along the lines of, "Hey, not sure if you've noticed this, but it looks like John is using your company's intellectual property to directly compete against you. If I had to guess, I'd assume his next step would be to make a move at your client list." The reply was short and sweet. "Thanks for bringing this to my attention. He'll be hearing from our attorney in the morning." John's website was brought down less than 24 hours later,